All right, well, my clock says 10 a.m. here in Irvine, California. Not so sunny as it's finally becoming winter. Welcome to the November 2013 KeyShot webinar titled Using KeyShot's Untapped Tools. I hope everyone here in the States had a good holiday weekend, enjoyed their Thanksgiving, spent some time with the family, while those outside of the States were probably still busy working. All right, well, my name is Rex Roberts. I'm using Thomas's account here, but yep, I'm Rex, and I'm a digital media artist here at Luxion. Take care of a lot of the image creation and content creation for the newsletter, the website, some of the tutorial videos on our YouTube page, etc. And today I'll be exposing some of KeyShot's features and functions that are often overlooked by a lot of our users, or some features that people are simply unaware of, unfortunately. So yeah, try and expose those features and make the best use out of them. So as a beginner level webinar, we'll cover some stuff that might seem a little bit obvious, but even something as simple as a KSP file is actually foreign to some KeyShot users out there. I have some big shoes to fill after last month's amazing advanced level webinar with Tim Fair, and that webinar is available to view at youtube.com/KeyShot3D. So you can see that here, and when this webinar is complete, we'll go ahead and post this one up to the page as well. In case you have to leave early, you can always come back in and reference it here from our YouTube page. Today I'll actually be using KeyShot 4.3. So we have the 4.3 update should be releasing to the public in a matter of days. So keep an eye out for that update. Many of you probably have automatic update enabled in your KeyShot, so it should do that update automatically for you. But yeah, keep an eye out for that. There's not really any new functionality or new features, I should say, but there are a lot of bug fixes and some really impressive improvements on the light source materials. So I know a lot of you guys have been waiting for some improvements on that stuff. Okay, so some of the topics we'll cover today are KeyShot for pre-production, using some stock models for added detail in your image, expanding your environment library. This will mostly apply to those of you without a pro license that do not have the HDRI editor. Talk about some ignored materials and textures that can be very useful and very cool. And then finally, we'll go over using a depth pass. So I know some people have had some questions about that, so I'll show you guys how we can take that depth pass into Photoshop, and instead of rendering out using depth of field, we'll do that all in Photoshop. So let's take a look at the image here that I've created. We're working on some clay materials here at Luxion, and I wanted to showcase the clay materials on a variety of different models, and I wanted to show those models on a backplate that was a little more interesting than just a solid color or a gradient background. So what I'm going to do today is show you how I created this custom backplate here, and talk about some of the benefits of using something like this. first of all, we have full control of the camera angles and the environment, so then we can use those, we can reference those settings and apply that to all of our different models, so we have a nice consistent look in our image. So let's go ahead and jump into KeyShot and get started. Okay, so I just had KeyShot paused using Shift-P, so that frees up the processor to use for GoToWebinar, etc. So I actually started with some inspiration. I found this image here, and I thought it would be really cool to have like a workbench table kind of set up and make this a little art studio. So if we take a look at the image properties here in our Windows Finder, we can go to the details and we can see the 35 millimeter focal length equivalent is at 27. So then if we go to our camera tab, we can see the 35 millimeter equivalent, set that to 27. And that way when we import our models, we'll have the same perspective that you see here in the image. So like I said before, just maintaining that consistency, that visual consistency. So that's a nice little trick just to reference that number. And I just found this image on Google image search, and most images, especially larger size images, will have those properties and that information. So let's go ahead and import some models. So I gathered some models from TurboSquid, and most of the models on TurboSquid are modeled in 3ds Max or another Autodesk software, which is relevant right now because we have Autodesk University in Las Vegas, and some of the guys are over there as we speak. So in this case, it's a 3ds file, so that's compatible to import directly into KeyShot. We don't have to use the plugin. However, new with KeyShot 4.3, we'll have an updated plugin that will be compatible with 3ds Max 2014. So center geometry, snap to ground, that's okay. Size, I'll use automatic just to keep the environment sliders and texture sliders a little more manageable. I have a collection of a few different models that aren't all modeled to scale. If they were, I would use Keep Original. That way, when we bring in the bench and the tools, etc., they will be the proper scale relative to each other. But in this case, I'll just use automatic. And I know this was modeled in 3ds Max, so we'll bring it in as a Z up and import our model. Okay, so if we take a look at our model here, it is one solid part. But that's okay because this model was UV mapped with some really nice textures. So I'll just drag and drop these into the respective texture swatch area. So the diffuse color into the colors tab. I have a specular here. Drag it in, and the bump map, drag it in there. So then I'll go back to the first texture I brought in, my color, and then click sync, and that should sync my specular and bump, all using the UV coordinates which were previously mapped to this model. So taking a look at the model, we can see we have this wooden top here, which appears, this section appears a little bit lighter than here on the left. So to be consistent with my backplate image with this door and the light coming in on the right side, I'm going to keep this lighter area here on the right. And maybe bring down my bump height a little bit. You can see might be a little high. Okay. And let's go over to our Cameras tab. And we'll start off with the inclination of 0, and we'll square ourselves up to our table. So you can see now with this 27 focal length, the perspective of the table actually matches perfectly the perspective of our backplate image. So we'll position this into place. And that looks good there. Let's go ahead and save out a camera. All right, let's quickly bring in the rest of our models here. I have some tools. This is an OBJ file. Drag and drop, add to scene, center geometry, snap to ground. Snap to ground isn't important here because we'll be moving them up onto the table anyways. And we'll import it in. So we could actually set this table up two ways depending on how we're planning on using this scene. If in this case we'll be rendering this out as a backplate image to drag and drop into any other scene. So it's okay that we have the table snapped to the ground. We'll move our tools up. But if we were going to actually use this geometry and save the bit file and import our models into this scene, we might want to move our table down so this top surface is the same level as the ground plane. Then we can disable our ground shadows and just rely on the self shadows to cast on the tabletop. That way you'll have that shadow clipping on the edge of the table. But for now, let's just move our tools into position. So you can see there the scale's a little large here. Just use our move tool and we'll type in our best guess at a scale value. That looks okay for now. And then to line these up with the table, we could go into orthographic mode here in our camera tab and set our inclination to 0. We could set our background color to white if we wanted to, just by pressing C, so we can see that gap in between there, and we'll just position it. This would be okay for now. If we wanted to get really detailed about this, you might want to consider, say, the weight of this screwdriver and move it, but this will be okay for now. So it actually looks like we're missing a map. Let's go back into perspective mode. So yeah, we're missing a map on this material, and that is the wrench. So we can just double click to edit that material, go over to our textures tab here, and just drag and drop our wrench into the color swatch. Change our mapping type to UV coordinates, And you can see at a 1-to-1 scale, it's actually not lining up properly. And that's because these maps are not perfectly square. And actually, all these maps are kind of different sizes, so I guess the best thing to do would be figure out, it looks like this map is about the same ratio. So then let's see what scale is being used on this map. So we have 1.439. I'll just copy that and then go back over to the wrench and input that value here into the Y. So there we go. Now we have our map lined up perfectly. And I'll just copy and paste these link materials. So shift left click to copy the material and shift right click to paste the link material. And I'll go ahead and do that for all of these parts here. So then we have our tools set up. So in the composition on the newsletter, I kind of moved the tools around to create an interesting and dynamic composition. But in this case, we can just move them to the side. One thing to think about when creating a composition like this is just how you intend to direct the viewer's eye. So in this case, I've just angled these in, so you want to create this continuous circular motion or circular eye movement, and you don't want to lead the viewer's eye off of the page. So let's go back to our saved camera and show our backplate image again. Let's go ahead and save before anything happens. So we'll save this. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, some people aren't even aware of what a KSP is. So I just did a normal save, which will save a BIP to your machine, and as long as all these textures, your lighting environment is on the machine, then KeyShot will be able to reference those textures. Now, if you're going to share this file with someone else on a different machine, you'd want to save a package. So saving a package is a KSP file, and that will enclose all your textures, your backplates, your HDRIs together into one file, essentially like a zip file that you can share. So if you ever open up a BIP and you're missing textures, you're going to want whoever you got the BIP from to save that file out as a KSP instead. Okay, so then I have some clay shavings. So all of these were downloaded from TurboSquid. This one was actually a Max file, so I opened this up in Max 2014, and it had these applied as opacity maps and this kind of wood texture applied as the color map. Now, when using the plugin to export from 3ds Max, you want to make sure that you're using standard materials. If you have V-Ray materials set up or something like that, most of the time they will not transfer over, especially if you have UV map textures. So you want to make sure that you convert all your materials to standard materials before exporting that BIP. And then also the opacity maps won't transfer over. So what I did is just replaced the color map on each of the parts with the opacity map. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I exported it as a BIP from 3ds Max. We'll add to scene and import. Okay, so let's zoom out and see what we got here. So you can see these opacity maps are actually applied as the color map. So let's reduce the scale. It's by going to selecting the top level part in our scene tree, going to the position tab, and we can use our scale slider or type in a value. That'll work for now. And then we'll just use our move tool and move those up onto the table just like we did for the tools. Again, you can use the orthographic mode if you desire, or for now we'll just eyeball it. So another good tool to use is the look at function. If you notice, I'm scrolling in, and you might find that you're kind of running out of space to dolly in. So if you use the look at function, you can right click and select look at, or you can use the hotkey to do so, and that'll center that object in your scene. So when you dolly in using the mouse scroll wheel, it'll always be centered there. So then let's go into our materials, and we're going to have to move our color maps over to the opacity maps. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that we have these synced, so that we retain these the UV mapping type and the scale, and then we can just drag and drop that over to the opacity. And we're just going to go ahead and do that for all of these little shavings. Now, if you wanted to copy this texture over to the opacity map, instead of just clicking and dragging, you can hold Alt and click and drag, and then that will copy that texture over. But we don't need this for now. One more here. Okay. So we have our opacity map set up here. Now, we obviously want these to be kind of this clay material that we're going to intend to use for our models. So if we were to just say, I have some clays created, if we were to drag and drop these onto the part, it would remove that opacity map. Then if we were to change the material type and dial in the settings, we would have to do that for each of these parts. So that can be a little tedious. Instead, I can just go over here to the top level model in the scene tree, right click, go to material, and change the material type. So a diffuse will work for now. So then we've changed all of those material types to a diffuse, and now we just need to apply a color. So I find that the color library is actually something that's definitely underutilized by a lot of the users, and it can be really helpful, especially when dealing with these kind of cases where you have texture maps applied, but you need to change the color of a group of objects. So there's actually a little hidden tool here. I actually have, I think, my aspect ratio locked here, so this guy is not expanding, but we can tear this off. And if we drag this out, you can see there's a little crosshairs icon, which if you hover over says find perceptual nearest colors in selected group. So then if we go over to our Pantone library, then we can use this find color. We can either use the eyedropper tool to say find a color in our scene, or we can just select our own color, hit OK, and then it'll find the top 5 nearest matches to that color that you selected. So then if we go back to our scene tree, we can just drag and drop our color swatch directly onto that top level and change the color of all of those parts. So I'll just dock that real quick again. Looks like move these a hair down. And let's go back to our saved camera to see what we got. Okay, so we can move these off to the side. Maybe create a duplicate. So select the top level and duplicate. You can move this group. Now, one of the newer features in KeyShot is the ability to group in the scene tree. So really no point in having both of these groups of shavings separated. So I can put these into the same group just by dragging and dropping, and you'll notice this little blue dot with a bar. So if the bar or if the blue dot is below the title, then it will move this group to below it, which it is already below it, so that won't change anything. So we want to have this blue dot sitting in the middle of that group, and then we'll just release the mouse. So now we have this group contained within our other group here. And creating groupings can be very helpful when you're using, say, render layers or model sets. So instead of having to assign each of those individual models to a render layer, now we can just assign this top level group to a render layer or a model set with one action instead of having to do multiple actions. Let's go ahead and save our file. Okay, so I think it's about time to set up our environment. And actually, the startup HDR isn't looking too bad for this scene. However, I know that when I have my clay models in here, I'm going to want something that has higher contrast, something a little more interesting with some warm and cool values like you see here in the backplate image. So I know a lot of people, a lot of users out there will just go ahead and use the startup HDR to render out their products, their images, but I recommend only using this just for a starting point to get your materials set up, and then go ahead and swap out your scene or swap out your environment with a few different HDRs just to see what it looks like under some different lighting. So yeah, if we put in our conference room, which has some brighter light sources in it, you can see the table is actually pretty glossy. So we'll double click to edit that and just add some roughness to it and fix that right up. So I can rotate the environment, and I kind of want to match the same lighting we have here. So have my light hotspot here on the right side of the table, and definitely want to have this underside of the table more in the shadowed area, so that it doesn't, attract too much attention. Now, say we wanted to render out an ambient occlusion pass. If we wanted to increase those shadows in post, we can also use grouping to do that. So let's actually create a new group by selecting the model's name and add a new subgroup under models, and then we can just select our models here and move them into our table group. So now we have all of that into one group. Now let me duplicate this group, and this is going to be our AO pass. And then we'll unlink our materials and then link them all so they're all the same material. Then we'll just double click to edit and change this to a diffuse. We'll delete our texture maps and change the color to a solid white. So now we can, we'll put an all white environment, but first let's save a view set here. So a view set is going to save all your settings in the environment tab along with your camera settings. So this is the warehouse with conference room environment. And for the ambient occlusion pass, we will go over to our studio environments and find just the all-white basic environment and change our background to a solid color. And then we'll go ahead and save another view set for our ambient occlusion pass. So let's say we wanted to be able to quickly toggle between these two. Since we have them separated into their own model sets or own model levels, we can create a new model set. Call this one AO. And this one original. So then we can use Shift M to quickly toggle between those variations. You can also access the model sets and see a list of the model sets here under View. So we can use our model sets, Shift M, toggle between those in combination with our saved view sets. And this can be really nice if you're doing a presentation live in KeyShot, just to quickly show those variations. So let's go ahead and add our ambient occlusion pass to the render queue. And go back to the warehouse scene. All right, so under the passes tab here in your render options, you can see there's a few different options for your pass output. So like I said earlier, I'm going to show you guys how to use the depth pass, so we'll enable that. Clown pass can be very helpful whenever you're doing post-production work. Rendering out with the clown pass, depth pass, geometric normal pass, this doesn't actually add any time to the render time. So it's a good practice to just output these if you are going to be doing any post-editing. And then for render layers, if we had set up any render layers, we'll have those output on separate layers. So we can just go ahead and put our original table onto a new render layer. Or actually, let's put our tools on a render layer because it looks like we have some hot spots here. So we might want to have some further adjustments of the tools in post. So then we can just add to a new render layer, call it tools. Okay. And we can add that to the queue. And let's go ahead and just process the queue. So I'm taking a look at some of the questions here. Dries, I know you're a big proprietor of the light passes. We're definitely looking into this for KeyShot 5, and there will be improvements on the existing passes as well. You'll see with the current depth pass, it's not perfect, but yeah, we'll be working on some improvements for the depth pass, something like a shadow pass, possibly. And I can actually show you guys quickly how to do a shadow pass. So I think my jobs are rendered. But yeah, before we jump into Photoshop, let me show you guys how to do a quick shadow pass. So I'll open up a new session and bring in a model. So Adam asked what the difference is between a shadow pass, a depth pass, and just a simple render. So the depth pass is going to allow you to create a depth of field. So I can show you using just this current scene. If we go to our camera tab, you can see we have an option for depth of field here. So this will create a blur on your image, which relates to distance. So if we pick our point of focus, maybe something closer to the front of our model here, and we want this to start blurring as we fall back, then we use our point of focus to select that focus distance that's automatically calculated. Select done, and then we can just decrease our f-stop, and then as I do so, you can see objects farther away from the point I selected will begin to blur. So that just adds a little bit of realism to your image, and also helps kind of direct the eye at a focal point. So as you're not distracted, like for a model like this, which is pretty complex and has a lot of interesting stuff going on, maybe you just want the viewer to focus on one area, so you can use depth of field to do so. However, when you use depth of field in KeyShot, this is going to increase your render time. So using a depth pass and creating depth of field in Photoshop, like I will show you shortly, is a quicker way of creating that depth of field, and it doesn't increase the render time at all. So before we go into Photoshop, I'll quickly show you the shadow pass and explain what that's about. So I have a backdrop ramp, which I modeled in SolidWorks. Looks like we referred to an older view set I had saved here. Let's go back, show a solid color. So then I'll just position this backdrop ramp using the move tool. If I hold shift, then I can snap the move tool in 15-degree increments, or I should say the rotate tool. Snap it to the ground and increase the scale. We'll snap it to the ground again. Give a little more space here. Okay, that's good enough for now. So basically, when creating a shadow pass, what we're going to do is separate the shadow, the ground shadow, I should say, from the rendered image, so you have more control over that in the post-production. So let's make this a little more interesting. So I'll rotate it so we're not looking straight onto the model. And with the backdrop ramp, we just want this to cover all of our real-time view here. And you can make this backdrop ramp any type of material, but if we use the ground material, then we'll have our cast shadows here, and we can still have a transparency with our background. So to create this shadow pass, we want to put our model onto a render layer. And our ground material, or our backdrop round, onto a separate render layer. So then when we render these out, we'll enable our render layers. Clown passes can't hurt. And we'll output. Jared, the clay materials are being developed right now for the ZBrush integration. So I'm sure you'll be on the list to find out about those. Yeah, keep an eye out for the upcoming ZBrush integration. We have some really awesome stuff going on with those guys. The Clown Pass is separating the different materials or parts into flat shaders, so you can make the selection very easily in Photoshop. Let's open up Photoshop and take a look at what a clown pass looks like. Okay, so we have some of our renderings here. There's a couple ways to open these up. For, say, our clown pass and our table, since we want those to be aligned, we can go to File, Scripts, and load files into Stack. Browse for those files. Select the files that you want to bring in. Actually, let's also bring in our ambient occlusion pass and our tools. Okay. So let Photoshop do its thing here, and what it's doing is loading all these files and then aligning them onto the layers. So our clown pass is perfectly aligned with our render. So yeah, here's the clown pass, and you can see that all the separate parts are given their own flat shader, so we can use the magic wand tool and make sure that we have our clown pass layer selected and just use that to quickly select that part, so we can use that to edit our final image. Say we wanted to create another layer just with the table there, and then we can make adjustments to that layer only. If you hold Alt while you add an adjustment layer, you can get the option to use the previous layer to create the clipping mask, so that way this brightness contrast only applies to this layer that we've created. So that gives you some more freedom of adjustment. Let's see, still going here with our shadow pass. So let's get started on using the depth pass. So I didn't bring the depth pass into this image because this is an 8-bit image, which you can see here, identified by the 8. So if we go to our depth pass, we can just bring that in, open it up. And now you can see this is a 32-bit image. So there's more light information basically in this image. Now, like I said before, we're going to be making some improvements on the depth pass, but for now we can just go ahead and adjust the exposure. You can see that for 32-bit images you don't have the option to make all these different adjustments, but in this case really the exposure is what we want to adjust, and we just want to find a point where we can actually make out some of these tools on the table, get a nice gradient going here. So what this depth pass represents, or what the colors represent, the darker gray is going to be the most in the foreground, where the lighter area will be in the background. So a perfect white would be the farthest away from the camera, when a 100% black is going to be the closest to the camera. So that should work for now, and we'll just flatten our image. Control A to select, Control copy, and we'll go back over to our rendering, go to our channels, and we'll create a new channel for an alpha, or a new alpha channel, and we'll paste in place Control Shift V to make sure that's aligned with the rest of the layers there. So now we have our depth pass as an alpha channel. And for the background, so we have this floor, the ceiling, and this back wall. The back wall is going to be the farthest away from the camera, so if we want to do this accurately, we can go into our alpha channel, use the magic wand to select where the back plate would be located, and then we can use our brush to kind of replicate those the floor, the ceiling, and the back wall. So we want the center to be the farthest away, so that's going to be a solid white. I suppose we can use the eyedropper to select the gray here from this back leg, and then we can just fill the background with that color, with the gray. Oops. Come on. Well, we'll just paint it in. And so since that back wall is going to be the farthest away from the camera, we'll take a pure white here, and then we'll kind of create this gradient here to replicate those walls. Okay, now we have our depth pass created. Go back and select the RGB layers, and let's delete this for now. So we have our final render selected. Now if we go up to Filter, Blur, and Lens Blur, we can start to add our depth of field. So here in this preview window, if you hold Alt, you can see the cancel changes to reset. So we'll just reset that back to the default settings. So this is what you guys will see when you first open it up. We'll change the source to that alpha channel we created. And then you can see the crosshairs when you mouse over the image. Select the point which you want to be in focus, and it'll automatically choose that focal distance. So say we wanted the white to be in focus. You can see as it goes into that gray area we had, it becomes more blurry. So you can kind of play around with this to see what is most suitable for the image. And then you can then adjust your iris to add more blur. You can change the shape of the iris. So I'm sure you can find more information about these specific adjustments online. But yeah, this is definitely a nice, easy, quick way, once you get the hang of it, to add a depth of field to your rendering without having to increase your render time. So there we go. We've added our depth of field to the image there. Okay. Well, it's 11 o'clock. Let's see if we got our shadow pass outputted. So let me quickly go over this before we end the webinar. Close these out. So we can go ahead and load files into Stack again. Select our images. And now we have these all aligned. You can see that that backdrop had a curve to it, so that's why you're seeing the black on the feet here. But if we hide the final render, hide the clown pass, you can see that the model was separated from the shadow, and that was by using the render layers, putting that backdrop ramp onto its own render layer as well as the bot. So if we move this to the back, we'll get rid of the white fringes there. And now we can adjust our shadow. We can make it darker and then have just adjust the opacity to change how dark that shadow is. And you can do the same thing basically with the ambient occlusion pass that I did before. So you just set your shadow layer to multiply and then use the opacity to adjust how dark that shadow is. Okay, so let me just go through some of these questions before we end it, see what I can answer here. Daniel, yes, you can expect fiber mesh to transfer over. Like I said, some pretty awesome stuff coming out with the ZBrush integration. I can't really go into it now, but it's really exciting. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. Andy asked about the shavings. If you have to do each of those individual shavings at a time, and the answer is yes, because those all use different opacity maps for those different parts. Adam actually left, but he asked if there are more backplates and environments to use with KeyShot. And I've actually found a pretty cool way of creating my own backgrounds, or at least gradient backgrounds. So you can get pretty creative with it. Let's just clear our geometry. Yes. And we'll add a ground plane in here just to bring in some planar geometry. But I'll actually rotate this 90 degrees so we can face it and change the material type. So yeah, we didn't really go over some of the ignored materials, so let's take a look at the anisotropic material, which is pretty cool. This is a metal base material, so if we change our specular to a white, if this had 0 roughness, then this is basically a chrome material here. We can see, so we have the perfect reflections from that material. But what's cool about the anisotropic is you can adjust the roughness independently by axis. So you can see adjusting the roughness of the Y independent from the X. So you can create an interesting background just by putting some planar geometry. Turn off the ground shadows so you don't see that. And what's nice about doing this is that it matches kind of the hues that you have in the environment that you're using for your scene. Or if we wanted to just show the lighting environment by itself, we don't even really need any geometry in here. We can show the lighting environment. Like these windows have some interesting colors going on. And then for those of you using the Pro version, you can open up the editor and add some blur to your image. Remember, you can always type in a value larger than the slider allows. So this is a way to create some interesting gradiated backgrounds as well. So you can kind of play around with that. And then even for those of you without a Pro license, you can do this stuff in Photoshop as well, just by, say, we wanted to use the office environment. We could export that to our desktop. And then we can just open that HDR in Photoshop. And we can add a blur, a Gaussian blur. So there you go. You get some interesting lighting going on that's not very consistent. So a little more dynamic, and you can play around with how much blur you actually want to add. And then you just save this out as an HDR, and then you can bring that right back into KeyShot. Save over it. So I'll just drag and drop that from my desktop. So now we have this nice blurred environment. So yeah, there's, it might seem like some of these environments in KeyShot might get a little old, but they're actually really versatile. Even if you don't have the HDR editor, you can take them into Photoshop. You can blur them. You can flip it vertically. So, for example, say you wanted this has a black floor with a lighter ceiling, you can just flip it vertically to have a black ceiling and a white floor, and it'll give you a totally different effect. So you can play around with that to find some interesting combinations, some interesting lighting effects. Ron asked if Save HDR is a plugin for Photoshop. No, as long as the image is a 32-bit image. So you can see here, if you go up to mode, we have 32 bits selected. So when you have a 32-bit image, you can output that as an HDR. Orest asked about some performance questions, that it's running a little slow on his PC. So KeyShot is completely CPU based, so the more cores you have on your system, the faster it's going to run. You don't need a fancy graphics card to upgrade your performance. So yeah, what you're looking for is the amount of cores. And Adam asked, how do I think when choosing between different studio environments? So let's go back into KeyShot and just take a look at some of the environments we have here and how they're separated into categories. So these two are a couple of my favorites because they have high contrast with a mix between kind of some soft lighting and some hard edges. And I find these to work very well with metallic materials, chromes, and high polished materials, because you get this nice gradiated effect with the high contrast. So really choosing your environment depends on the type of product you're working with, what your scene looks like. Say for automotive, we might want something like this that has the high contrast, so like the high polished type of materials. But if we're using maybe a more simple product, maybe a cylindrical product, the panels are really good for that because it helps define the shape of that cylinder. So really what you're looking for when selecting your environment is just helping to define and make it clear what all of the surfaces look like on your model. All right, well, looks like we've run out of time. I'll take a look at the list of questions and try and get back to any of you guys that I wasn't able to. And yeah, I want to say thanks for attending. And again, this will be available on the YouTube page, youtube.com/KeyShot3D. Next month, we will not have a webinar, or I should say December this month, just because of the holidays and everything. So we'll start the webinar series back up again in January. And I think we're looking to have another guest webinar, maybe Tim Fair, maybe someone else. So yeah, keep an eye out for the newsletter, and thanks again. See you next time.